You're listening to episode number 47 of the Transform Your Life from the Inside Out podcast. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about, and you're going to learn even more about what I call the Be, Do, Have formula and why it's the only strategy that will help you get everything that you want in life. So keep listening. Hi, I'm Jim Fortin, and you're about to start transforming your life from the inside out with this podcast. I'm widely considered the leader in subconscious transformation, and I've coached super achievers all around the world for over 25 years. Here, you're going to find no rah-rah motivation and no hype, because this podcast is a combination of brain science, transformational psychology, and ancient wisdom all rolled into one to take your life to levels you've never thought possible. If you're wanting a lot more in life, to feel better, to heal, to have peace of mind, to feel powerful and alive, and to bring more abundance and prosperity into your life, then this podcast is for you, because you're going to start learning how to master your mind and evolve your consciousness. And when you do that, anything you want then becomes possible for you. I'm glad you're here. Okay, I'm sure at some point in the podcast you probably have heard me talk about the BEDOHAVE model. I'm going to dig into it deeper here, and then I'm sure if you've been listening for any amount of time, we're doing some live training starting on September the 4th. I've talked about it very briefly for the last month and a half, and I'm going to go even deeper in that live training. But for today, I want to talk in depth about the BEDOHAVE model and the HalfDoobie model. Okay, so what is the BEDOHAVE formula and what is the HalfDoobie? All right, most people work from HalfDoobie, and I also want to say that I also used to work from HalfDoobie, and it is a broken strategy. Anytime I use the word strategy, I just want to reiterate that when I say strategy, what I mean is a strategy to me is nothing more than a mental sequence of steps. You're strategizing, we all have strategies. However, some strategies are not very effective. Okay, the HalfDoobie model is if I have or I had something, then I could do something and I could be something which is successful. And it's a broken model because we never have if we don't have, which I'll explain more in just a moment. In this particular episode, I want to talk about be, do, have. Be, do, have is who do I have to be, meaning in what ways do I have to be at the identity level to do the things that I choose to do or want to do to have the things that I want, which is success. With have to be, people work like this. If I have, let me give you an example of maybe you're an online marketer and you want to grow your business. And let's say that you want to do Facebook ads. Now, the have to be model would be, well, you know what? If I have or I had more money, they start with have or had. If I had more money, then what I could do is I could do something. I could hire somebody, I could run Facebook ads, I could hire an ad copywriter, I could pay for ads. So I could do something, and then I could be successful. Well, that is a broken model, and I don't know the percentages, but quite literally most of you probably work by that model. And as I said, I used to work by that same model. The model we're talking about here today is be, do, have. Who do I have to be? Meaning ways of identity, ways of being, characteristics of being. Who do I have to be to do the things that I need or choose to do to have the success that I want? So what I look at is I look in life, in all stations in life, and I ask myself, what kind of person does that when I'm talking about certain things, or I'm looking, at my own life? What kind, and that's a really simple way to put it, what kind of person would I need to be to actually get XYZ outcome? I want to use my own life as an example. If you've listened for any amount of time, and if you haven't, this is what I say quite often, go back to episode number 1 and start there, because I'm not sure where you're joining me in the life of my podcast. Go back to the very first episode and start there. And I stumbled there because I said go back to the very first beginning. I'm recording this really late on a Sunday night. And you've heard me mention before, if you've been with me for any amount of time, that I work with a shaman. I apprentice with a shaman. My brother-in-law, my sister's husband, is a shaman. I've said before, I'll say again, they can be traced back 70,000 years. They were the advisors to Mayan kings. In Native American times, they were the medicine men. Now, why do I tell you all this? Well, you probably heard me say it before. And by the way, I'm going to probably stumble around a little bit in this episode. I promise it's going to be very valuable for you. But I just want to talk to you. I mean, this is not some presentation that I'm doing. I just want us to visit for a bit. But I was with my brother-in-law last night, well, this morning until 7 a.m. this morning, the shaman, and that's quite frequent. There are many nights that I do not get to sleep at all. And the reason that I tell you that, because it pertains to this model. Now, let me take this down to, practicality in a way you can understand it, is working with a shaman in the capacity that I do, it requires a lot of energy. It's almost a 24/7 job working a regular air quote job, like helping people, like I do, and being a transformational coach and expert and everything else. And then working with a shaman is also a massive commitment of energy, and we're energy beings. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is right now I am not impacting 10 million people a year. Now, the question is, do I want to do that? And that answer is, I don't know. I know that I'm having an impact in the world right now, and I'm impacting you and a lot of people. But what I'm looking at is, where do I really want to go? And I do not have that entire answer yet. But the reason that I tell you that is right now I'm not impacting 10 million people per year. And if I wanted to do that, I would have to ask myself, I would have to stop and say, Jim, in what ways must you be? What are the characteristics of being, and in what ways must you be to impact 10 million people per year, or 20, or whatever? Then it's just an arbitrary number that I'm giving you here. But because I'm not doing it yet, I am not yet that person. Now, we all have our own lives, and you want what you want, and I want what I want, and we're living in different ways. I don't know where I'm going to go in the next 3 to 5 years based upon my work with a shaman. I don't know. I don't know. But what I do know, and the reason I'm telling you all this, is because if I want to impact 10 million people per year, most people think, well, I've got to do things differently. No, that's the wrong place to start. That's the broken model. That's the HalfDoobie Model. I first look at in what ways would I need to be to impact 10 million people per year. And I also look at, what kind of person, not in terms of their, and I'm just going to use these, not in terms of moral integrity or any of this kind of stuff, but what kind of person in terms of what characteristics and ways would they be on the inside. And I do want to point out here, and I don't have any reason to defend myself, but I'm going to use that phrase, and in my own defense, literally, maybe some of you can relate, but working with a shaman, quite literally, in the capacity I do, is a full-time job in itself. So other people can go out there and they can impact a lot more people, maybe, but I guarantee you they don't do the things that I do, meaning many times not even sleeping for days at a time and doing the work and the energy work that I'm doing and many, many other things. And I'm going to leave it at that. But that's an example, and in my own life, I have to look at, and I must work from the be, do, have model. Now, what we're trained in and what we're indoctrinated in as children is what I call obviously the have, do, be model. You have to do to be, and you have to have money, and you have to have an education. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and it was a different world back then. And we were told, you know what, if you want, a good life, you must go to college. You have to have. And I remember back in the late 80s when I was out of college, a lot of companies would not even interview people unless they had, because that's the culture we lived in, unless they had a college diploma. And we have been trained that way, most of us, for most of our lives. We have been trained as a doers. And the doers are the ones that have to have something many times prior to do to actually be successful like they want to be. And we're trained, many of you listening right now, you've been told you have to do all these things, which we'll talk about more in this podcast. You have to do all these things to be successful. And when you do these things, then you will be successful. But what we're never taught is, well, who do you even have to be in terms of characteristics to do the things that you want to do? And a great example of what I'm using right now is, back in the 80s, and I'm sure generations prior, and even a little bit after that, and even now, to a large degree, is you must do something, you must go to college. But then we look at that is, well, what kind of student are you being in college? So obviously being, you can do all day long, but the being and who and how you're being precedes the quality of the doing. And most people just don't understand that. And I'm not tossing any stones there because for a fair amount of my life, I was that very same way. Why? Because that's the way that I was reared. I also want to say in our culture, we're taught to do, as I just said, and we're taught, if you do things in the right way, you're also going to be successful in life. And that's not just, that's just not true. But I look at when I was a kid, I remember as I was thinking about this podcast and I'm thinking about doing, I have not thought about this in 49 years, quite literally, maybe 49. But I remember when I was 5 years old, and I remember because I was in kindergarten. And my mom said to me, she says, if you weed the flower bed, and it was probably only a 4 foot bed. I mean, my mom was not a tyrant. It's a little bitty flower bed out front. She goes, if you weed that flower bed, then I will give you a nickel so you can buy a Coke. And it didn't dawn on me till just now, earlier today, that wow, that was my, at least my earliest memory into the indoctrination of that if I do something, I will get something. And you know what? Then I can be happy because I have a Coca-Cola. And of course, back in the 70s, teach the world to sing with Coke and all this kind of mumbo jumbo in the ads and all that. But notice how I was indoctrinated from a very early age that I had to do something to get something. And I'm sure you have probably been the same way in your life. What I notice also coaching people this day and age is that many people think they have to do things to be accepted. And I've noticed from many, many people, they think that, oh, okay, if I go out and do some things and what I do, if I'm successful in what I do, let me give you an example here. I'm going to just segue here. I had a one-to-one client one time, and her goal was to be this big, social media guru, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Part of her personality, she likes the notoriety and the recognition and all this kind of stuff, and that's fine. She's young. She's probably 27, 28, and when I was that age, I was the same way. This day and age, I'm quite the opposite. I mean, if I could just be Mr. X on a podcast and no one, ever knew my name, I would be fine with that also. I do what I do because this is what I do, but I don't need the notoriety from it. But anyway, I said, what's so important to you about, building this $50 million company? And she said, well, when I do that, people will respect me. What I want you to notice there is that she thought that if I go do all these things, and I'm sure as you're listening, you can probably think of some areas in your own life. If I go do all these things, then what's going to happen is I'm going to create something. And then when I create something, other people are going to look at me and go, wow, look at you, look what you did. And then they're going to actually place more value on me. And what a lot of people do is they get value in their lives. And actually, they place value on their lives by what they do. And they feel if they're not doing a whole lot in some way or another, then they do not have a whole lot of value. I mean, this is a pesky trap, quite literally, that I would say a fair percentage of the world gets trapped into is that we think we have to do things to be valuable or to find valuable in ourselves or for other people to find value in us. Many people also think that they're not successful until they do something, and in particular, not until they do something, but they do something that other people recognize. And then when other people recognize it, then they think, whoa, okay, I'm a big deal now. I'm successful because I did X, Y, Z, and other people recognize me for that. And as I said, I'm not tossing any stones. I grew up a small town Texas farm boy. And literally, literally this day and age, I lived in New York City. I worked with movie stars. I used to work, Wall Streeters. I worked really the high end of my industry. And I've visited and hung out with royalty and very, very, very well-known people and et cetera. But, if you pull back the curtain, quite literally, I grew up in a town of 2,000 people, literally one stoplight. I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go feed the cattle. And I went to school, did athletics or whatever afterwards, come back home, and I'd go to work again. I literally, now mind you, I wasn't in overalls and barefooted, or in my bare feet, but definitely I grew up what you would say a farm boy. And it was just drilled in my head from a very early age that I had to work hard, I had to put my nose to the grindstone, I had to struggle, I was taught, and I had to sacrifice. Because if I did all those things, which is what my parents wanted for me, they wanted me to be successful in their definition of it. If I did all those things, then I could be very, very successful in their mind. What I want to point out also, and this needs no defense, is that people think that if you go do things, and we're taught if you work really, really hard, and yes, struggle and all the things that I was taught, then you're going to be a success in life. That's just not true. Could it be true? Yes. Is it true statistically? Absolutely not. Because you see many people, and I mean the masses, they're working really hard. And right now, even in the USA, 79% of people live paycheck to paycheck. They are working really, really hard, but yet they don't have a whole lot to show for it. I mean, 79% paycheck to paycheck, which means they have nothing to show for their hard work. And these are hardworking people trying to actually just get by and put tires on their car and food on the table and pay their health insurance. And they're working really hard. And they're obviously doing a whole lot, but yet they're not being at least materially successful. And I want to actually just touch on that for a moment. I mean, to me, being rich doesn't, it's a thing. I don't think anyone can be defined by their money. I mean, for me, I evaluate people based upon their quality of character and their heart, not based upon things that they have. But in our culture, we're told you have to go do things to be successful. So I think by now you're recognizing the model that most people work by, HalfDoobie, that is a broken model and a broken strategy. Not only that, and I'll give you some more examples in a moment, but not only that, many times it makes people feel bad about themselves. Or let me say this, it doesn't make people feel anything because no one can make us feel anything. We choose to feel as we feel. But when people operate from that model, many times it leads them to a place where they feel bad about themselves. So let me give you an example about that. And by the way, that's a completely broken strategy as well because that's working from the outside in. When people work from that model, what they're saying is, I will feel on the inside based upon what I create on the outside. And if I do not do it on the outside, then I'm going to feel bad on the inside, which if you've listened to me for any amount of time, you know that life comes from the inside out. And then what people, when they work by that model, what they're perpetuating is simply a broken strategy that keeps them trapped. But I want to give you an example here of things. I mean, people in our culture, and I'm sure it's not our culture, it's all over the world, because one of the highest drivers, and a lot of research has been demonstrated and done on this, a, a high driver for human beings is social status. Social status drives a majority of the population. So a lot of people will say things like, you know what, I want to be successful and I want people to think that I am successful. Why? Because it gives me more social status. And to be more successful, that would mean that I would have to drive a brand new Mercedes-Benz. So, and then people will say in their mind, so once I have a new Mercedes, then I will be successful. And then they go into, well, for me to get the Mercedes, then I have to do something. I have to actually do something like go to more college or do this or do that and all these things. And then when I do these things, and I also actually have to get a job that will trade X amount of time and then X amount of dollars and X amount of positions and all these kind of things. And then once I get all of that, then I can have the salary and then I can purchase the Mercedes and then I will be successful. That entire scenario that I just, I kind of jumbled up there, but the entire scenario is all about doing. Do. When I do A, when I do B, when I do C, when I do D, then I can actually, I can be successful. And I'm going to say probably for the third or fourth time, and I think you're getting it by now, that is a completely broken performance strategy and life model. In the model that I just gave you, so I see it a lot of times, people telling other people what they're going to go do in the world so they can be something and they're going to have all this stuff and they're going to do it all. And as I alluded to, that many times when they don't do it and that they can't be it, meaning be successful, now they feel bad and now they feel like a failure and all this kind of stuff. And then they go hide from people and they're embarrassed and they're ashamed and all this kind of nonsense that we as human beings have been indoctrinated and trained to get into. So if you're working the have, do, be model first, and that's the model you work from, I've said now probably the fifth time that's a broken strategy, and the reason why is this. Like I gave you the example about Facebook ads and wanting to build your business. Well, if you don't have the money in the first place to do something, then you don't do it. And then if you don't do it, then you cannot be successful. However you define that. Of course, that's arbitrary. But the point, and I think you're getting that, the bigger point is when you work from have, do, be, and you don't do to be, well, then you never get any new have, meaning new money or whatever, because you're not doing anything, but you're not being the kind of person in the first place you need to be. So I'm going to break that down for you even further here. Many, many years ago, one of my students wrote a book on alcoholism, and he asked me to proof it for him. And he said there was one line in the book for me that was just like extremely impactful. I'm not what people would define as an alcoholic, so there wasn't other takeaways. Well, I don't know, but there's this one line. There's this one takeaway in there. The takeaway was for the alcoholic, tomorrow never comes. And the meaning of that was, well, the alcoholic always says, I'll quit tomorrow, I'll quit tomorrow. But for the alcoholic, the tomorrow never comes. So for people that work from have, do, be, and I have been here and oh my gosh, is this a trap? For people that work from have, do, be, if I have the time and the energy and the money, let's go there. If I have or I had the time, energy, and money, then I would do something and I could be more successful or I could be a person with more freedom. But here's the thing. When we work from that model, the having never comes. And because the having never comes, we continue to repeat that cycle over and over and over again, and we're working from circumstance. Anytime that you say, and you're talking about have, I do not have enough time, I do not have enough energy, I do not have enough money, you are 100% working from circumstance. And when you work from circumstance, you will repeat your circumstance. And then what you will do is what people do, and I have been there as well. Then we get into self-deception, saying, oh, no, things are going to change. And then we get into erroneous thinking like, oh, no, maybe something will happen. Maybe, luck or I don't know. Maybe something will happen somewhere. And the truth is this. And I've looked at my own life. And seriously, take some time. Look at your own life. Is when you work from this place, it's just over and over and over the same pattern. Week after week, month after month, year after year. My business now does quite well, very, very well. And I have to say that for many years I worked on the have, do, be model. And you know what? I would hire this person, and I would hire that person, and I would hire this company. And I'd hire these companies if I had the money to do it. And I can tell you that I've been pretty much an entrepreneur, since I got out of college. So that's, I don't know, 1987, 32 years or something. And I did do a little stint in corporate 25 years ago, and it wasn't very long because it wasn't for me. However, I work from that model of have, do, be, and I'm going to tell you, my business did not start really getting traction and growing, but this could be anything in your life, not just business. My business did not start getting traction until I started asking myself, okay, who do I have to be, and what ways must I be to get the outcomes that I want? And when it comes to being, then what I look at, okay, what are characteristics and ways of being? And we can be 100% responsible. We can be committed. We can be self-integral. There are many things and many ways that we can be that will get us the outcomes that we want. I remember a friend of mine, I've known him for a lot of years, and he spent about a decade as pretty much, and this is not hyperbole in any way, he spent about a decade as the number one most visible marketing, let's just say marketing person in the world. He's coached hundreds and hundreds of internet millionaires and people now that lead the industry. He kind of fell off the radar in 2012, and he's taking it easy and resting back on the millions that he made. And I've known him for a lot of years, before he even got into internet marketing. And we were talking one day, and he said, Jim, there's a difference between being, again, that word, there's a difference between having resources and being resourceful. And he goes, many people want to have the resources before they start a business. And he goes, you've seen businesses before, and they will have plenty of money in the bank. And then 2 years later, they'll be out of business. And then you can look at a company and they don't have a lot of money. They're a startup, but they are being resourceful. And a couple of years later, they're doing really, really well. And I recognized in that moment that it's more important for me that I be resourceful rather than actually have money, because I can have money and lose it. But the more that I'm being resourceful, the more money that I can attract, which means that I can actually be what I want, which is, um, I guess people would call successful. Hopefully that resonates with a lot of you guys, because so many people, as I said, we work from have do be, and that is just a defunct, broken model. Something else that I want to point out here for all of you listening, and this is a whole other episode that I need to do, but it's on fear. So I know a lot of you are probably saying, yep, Jim, okay, yeah, I get it. I've got to be first. And then what you're saying in your mind without recognizing it, but, how can I be that first when I have fear about being that? Irony here. And again, I've been here as well. So trust me when I tell you, I have been down this road before. People get into loss aversion, and we actually will seek to keep what we have before we will reach for something new. But the broken strategy that I have been in, well, I haven't, it's been a lot of years, but I've been in it, so I understand it, is okay, I want to do XYZ so I can grow my business, but I do not have the money right now. And if I put out the money that I have, then how am I going to pay my rent or my car payment or student loans or whatever a lot of years ago? So then what I never recognized is, as long as I work this broken strategy, I will never have the additional money that I want, because I'm working with a broken strategy, because I'm playing from loss aversion. Meaning that if I give up what I have, then I might not have more than that later, and oh my gosh, now I'm going to play for fear. And then talk about another trap that we get into. I mean, it's crazy. And even in psychology, there's been a lot of research on this when I talk about loss aversion, is that the pain of losing something for people is 2 times more powerful than the pleasure of gaining something. You've heard before, we move from pain to pleasure, and this is along the same lines, but we are so afraid for the most part of losing what we have, even if we don't have a lot yet, because we're not being the kind of person to have a lot, that we will not actually be courageous enough to step out there and be somebody new to create more, because we're afraid of losing the very little that we already have. Now, if that made sense to you, as you can clearly listen and understand, that is a bunch of self-deceptive mumbo jumbo, and it's like, whoa, I mean, I never realized I was stuck in that mental trap, and that's why so many people they stay stuck. Also, the fear for a lot of people, and like I said, I'm tossing myself under the bus here. I've been there, and I'm no longer there, and I haven't been there in a lot of years. But a lot of times for people, the fear also boils down to is that they don't trust themselves. They think that, okay, if I don't, if I'm not going to, well, here, let me back up. They will say, I don't have it, but I do have it, but I don't have it, but I could find it and I can borrow it and maybe I could take it out of savings or whatever. But technically, I don't have the money to do what I want to do. But I do have it and I can get it. But if I get it and then I use it, and then guess what? Then if I lose it, meaning you don't trust in yourself because you're not being resourceful, then if I lose it, then I'm going to be worse off, because now I've put out what I didn't have in the first place. Now I'm deeper in a hole again. Now I'm even more stuck than what I was. Now, hopefully, if that made sense, I see that as and I've been there, I see that as a very prevalent pattern that a lot of people run. And that's where being courageous comes in, which is a whole different podcast, and that's where being resourceful comes in. Okay, something else that a lot of people get into is self-delusion. And so many people get into, well, you know what, I don't have it, because they're working from have do be, I don't have it right now. So you know what, because I don't have it, what they don't even recognize they're doing is they let their entire life just go in a mediocre circle over and over and over again. But what they get into is, well, I hope something is different. I'm hoping some new client will call. I'm hoping this meeting that I go to, which is then working from desperation, which is a whole nother podcast in itself. Many years ago, I created a blog post on, and it was titled, You Smell Like Desperation, which actually it pushes people away. But people get into the self-delusion of they just think something's magically going to change in their life. And there's a whole other episode on this that I've already created about how people use the law of attraction to repel. When they get into that state, they're repelling even more things, and they definitely don't have it. You know, you might have heard me say before is that life reflects you, and that your entire life is a mirror. And James Allen, when he wrote A Man Thinketh back in I believe, the 1860s, talks about how our external world is nothing more than a reflection of our internal world. And to demonstrate that, have you ever noticed that poor people, people who need the money the most, have the least? Well, the reason why is that their external world is reflecting their internal world. People that have a lot of money most times, unless they've inherited the money, people that have a lot of money, they've created it. Well, their external world is a 100% reflection of their internal world. And then you could say, well, Jim, and I'll get back on track here in a second. You could say, well, what about people who win the lottery? Well, research has shown that a significant amount of people who win the lottery, and I've actually, done some of this in another episode, people who win the lottery are broke 3 years later. Why? Because we always go back to the way that we're being unconsciously, which is our unconscious identity. Now, in the headline, I did talk about how to use the BEDOHAVE model and how to be a conscious transformer. That's a word that you're going to hear me start saying more often, is a conscious transformer. Most of us go through our lives on autopilot, and I'm going to talk more about this later in a different episode. But when I talk about a conscious transformer, what I mean is wake up. And I mean that in a respectful way, but wake up. And you are a born creator. You are a born manifester. You are a born transformer. But we have to be it before it can ever happen. Because whatever we are being is our experience of life. So again, even though that's in the headline, I will actually you're going to hear me start saying this a lot, and at least the next 6 months of episodes, because I'm wanting you to shift your identity, and I want you to become, and I want you to be that conscious transformer and start recognizing that power, because that'll start helping you create the things that you want to create in life. And I alluded to a little bit, but your ways of being and being a conscious transformer. Your being, which this is a BEDOHAVE episode, your being and your way of being precedes all of your doing. And being can also be an identity. What ways are you being in your identity? Not only that, and I don't want to actually confuse anybody here, but sometimes if you are being, let's say for example, there's a concept called learned helplessness, which people, when they get in that trap, they've learned they cannot help themselves and they stay trapped in a very negative cycle. But for people that are trapped in that trap, let's go here. What ways are they being? So obviously, by me giving you that example, you can see that everything in your life comes down to the identity that, and you heard me talk about identity, but the identity that you are being. Let me give you another concretized example here, selling professionals. Right now, I work with more entrepreneurs, but for many, many years, 2 decades, I worked with high-performing selling professionals. And many times people would say, like real estate agents, for example, I worked heavily in real estate, and they would say, you know what, I'm not making, which is having, I don't have enough money yet. So because I don't have enough money, then I have to go do something. And then what I have to go do is I have to lead generate and prospect and market and all these kind of things. Then when I go do these things, then I will actually have more listings, which means I will have more money, which means I will be successful. All right, so I think that's pretty clear. And I'm going to dig a little deeper into that. But notice how most people work from, if I go do something, then I can have and then I can be. Now here's something that most people never ever look at is, I'm going to slow down here. But most people never ask themselves the question, well, who and how was I being in the first place that had this problem where I don't have any money? So most people never even address that, and then they try to go do things, which one of my coaches said to me, and I've always remembered this line, is that whatever you do and you're doing is only as effective as the being doing the doing. So a great example, let's go back to talking about real estate agents. Let's say that the real estate agent wants to do something, but let's say they are afraid, which is a way of being. They are afraid to prospect. Well, what they do is only as effective as to the degree they're being. So our being always precedes every single thing in our life. And then what happens is people just perpetuate, which I said multiple times now. People perpetuate and never have, because if you never have, you don't do anything, and then you can't be anything different, which means you can never do anything differently, which means here we go in the merry-go-round cycle again. I also want to point out, and I got some people chastising me a little bit for this, and hey, that's cool. I'm okay with it. But there's some people out there right now that are big social media personalities, and one social media personality says things like, you've got to work until your eyeballs bleed. Well, do you recognize that that's simply all doing? And the doing is only as effective as the being. And that's why if you get into that mentality and you're not being the kind of person you need to be, you can work until your eyeballs bleed all day. And you can do and do and do and do. But that doing is only as effective as the being, and it's a broken strategy. There's someone else out there that's very, very large, and they tell people to, and by the way, there may be a workaround this, I don't know. In my own mind, I don't see it. But this person will say, if you want to create, new things in your life, you've got to take massive action. Well, have you ever noticed before that many things you take massive action or you try, and then 3 days later you're back to your old behaviors again? The reason why is what I look at is taking massive action is a doing behavior, and what I look at are what are the characteristics and ways of being that are unconscious and in the identity of the person doing the doing. So for example, a person can say, I'm going to do something and I'm going to take massive action, but if in their identity they are being a person who has no discipline or not a lot of discipline, then it's very hard to continue with the doing, because at the identity level, they are not being disciplined to maintain the massive action. What I want to share with you, and I've said a whole lot here, what I want to share is that doing your way to whatever it is you want, economic security, riches, whatever it is, generally, if you start with doing your way there, it's going to be a very hard road for you. Where you want to start is you want to be, as I said, a conscious transformer. You want to start thinking consciously now, instead of it just, you defaulting to doing. You want to start thinking consciously in terms of, okay, as I started, what kind of person would have the things that I want? What ways must I be to get the outcomes that I want? So the question that I want to ask you to wrap up this episode is this. Here's the question for you right now. And I only want you to pick one. And when I say one, and I'm going to laugh here a little because I've done this a lot of years. When I say one does not mean 5. 1 does not mean 2. 1 means 1. I want you to pick one way, and take some time with this. Consider this. What is one way of being? And then, you could say, well, Jim, how do I be this? Well, go back and listen to the earlier episodes on subconscious identity and reprogramming your subconscious mind. But what is the number one way that you could be that would make the biggest impact in your life? Consider that. What is the number one way that I could be that would make the biggest impact in my life? And when you start conditioning yourself, I've already created an episode on habits many episodes ago, and on unconscious identity. When you start being that, you're going to be shocked because your life is going to start changing. Why? Because you're being the person you need to be, to do the things you need to do, to have the things that you want to have. And now you're working from the inside out as opposed to the outside in. Alrighty, couple of things here. Every episode there's a transformational takeaway. So when I was with my brother-in-law, the shaman, last night, And he said this many times, but I heard it in a way last night that I really haven't heard it before. And he said it, I'm going to say it slowly here and just ponder this. But everything is just you in the mirror. Everything is just you in the mirror. Your life is just you in the mirror. You look at your external life, your bank account, your health, your relationships. Look at everything in your external life. Everything in your external life is a reflection of who you are in the mirror, and who you are in the mirror is your way of being. So the question that I ask you is right now is, what is the number one way of being? And because life reflects you 100%, when you start being that way, your life starts being that way. Okay, as I said when I started here a little earlier, as we are, and you already know it at this point, if you've been with me for any amount of time, we're starting training on September the 4th, and it's called the BEDOHAVE series. And we're going to go a lot deeper into this because I want to show you a couple of psychological models that I've talked about very briefly in the podcast. You probably have already forgotten, you probably have already missed it, but I wanted to dig even deeper, a way to actually access even deeper and understand even deeper your ways of being. So whatever you do, make sure that you get registered for that live training. Registered at jimfortin.com/BEDOHAVE, jimfortin.com/BEDOHAVE. I'm sure the link here is in the show notes. I'm sure that my team probably put a little commercial in here somewhere in the middle of the episode, directing you to get registered for that training. It's going to be 3 hours of be, do, have training. One training is going to be on being, one's going to be on doing, one's going to be on having, and then I'm going to actually do an hour follow-up with each of those live trainings. So effectively, it's going to be 6 hours of training on be, do, have. So make sure you get registered for that. We're going to go even deeper. Okay. The next episode is a transformational story, and I'm going to be visiting with a current student named Naduk. Now, when I say her name, Naduk, interesting, because you might even be thinking, did I hear that name right? And she and I had an amazing conversation, because she even used to hold herself back because of the stories that she had about her name and how she thought people would perceive her. Now, I know, like one of the episodes with Katie, we talked about, illness and healing yourself with power of the mind, and I'm sure a lot of you could relate to that. But this episode also, we talk a little bit about that, but we also talk about many things that many of you are going to be able to relate to. And she has an amazing story about, she used to have the identity of a person being sick. She no longer has that. She talked about her money issues. She talked about hiding because of her name and putting herself out there in fear of judgment about what people would think about her name. I mean, it is a phenomenal, phenomenal episode. So make sure you tune in to next Monday's episode, The Transformational Story with Naduk. As I tell you every episode, I mean from the bottom of my heart, I know there's an outro here and it's all, pre-recorded. But seriously, I am so grateful for the opportunity to be able to serve you on your journey. Okay, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you over on the next episode. And yeah, I'll catch you there. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to this entire podcast. If you're the kind of person who likes to help others, then share this with your friends and family. If you found value, they will too. So please share via your social media channels. Also, if you have questions, I'm here to assist. You can email me questions to support@jimfortin.com, and I may even use your question for a future podcast episode. Also, if you want transformational content like this daily, connect with me on Instagram. My Instagram name is I am Jim Fortin. Finally, I do have a personal request. I believe that we're all here to help others and to grow and evolve ourselves. Together, you and I, let's help more people. If you would please leave a review on iTunes, and a good one, by the way. I'd be grateful, and through your assistance together, we can transform more lives.